Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Such a quiet news Friday, Jim. I don't know how we're going to fill three martinis today. Oh, yeah, I do. First of all, welcome back. Thanks to Scott Bertram and Inez Stetman for filling in the last 3 days. Jim was off in Denver this time. He's doing a whole tour of the AFC West for some reason this year. He's been to Kansas City, now Denver, so L.A. and what's the other one? Vegas now is where the Raiders are. I guess are going to have to be on the list somehow this year. But obviously, the big news is that yesterday afternoon we heard about the 34 guilty counts against Donald Trump, guilty on all counts in it's known as the hush money trial. It's basically falsifying campaign expenditures. This has been a heated topic, not just since the verdict, but all throughout about whether these charges should have ever been brought. Would they have been brought against somebody who wasn't Donald Trump? Did they torture the law to even get to the charges? Did the jury even know what the charges were until the closing arguments? There's a whole lot to discuss here, so we're going to break it down in a number of ways. So it's going to go bad, and a little bit of good towards the end. And so the bad is that, Jim, and I think a lot of people said this well, including Andy McCarthy, your colleague who's been talking on Fox, is that if you're going to prosecute a former president, it should be a clear crime that people are familiar with and your evidence has to be overwhelming. This seemed to be like that internet meme with the strings and the pictures and all sorts of other things from a detective trying to put a case together here. And so the argument was, on the right certainly, that this was being tried in Manhattan by a Soros-funded DA, and apparently referring to Soros now makes you an anti-Semite on the left, so suddenly they care about that issue. And then you've got Judge Merchan, who, as far as I could tell, made every decision that he possibly could to thwart the Trump case, including denying witnesses, like Bradley Smith, the former Federal Elections Commission chairman, who was going to explain from his perspective why Trump had not violated federal campaign law. That was denied because the judge said there might not be any reference to federal campaign law, so it wouldn't be germane. And then, lo and behold, the prosecutors went and talked about federal campaign law in the closing arguments, and the defense had no chance to respond. Then there's you don't have to agree on the underlying crime. You just have to agree that there was one, and on and on and on. So there seemed to be fertile grounds for appeal. So the fact that it was this type of case in this jurisdiction and the way this trial was run is why there's such a political stain here. Trump, in his statements, had a couple of things to say about it after the verdict. First of all, he talked about the judge and the trial itself.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a Soros-backed DA and the whole thing. We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution.
And then Trump blamed Biden for fueling all of this.
Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end, and we'll win. Because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists. And they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble.
Jim, a lot to chew on here. We'll chew on it some more in the next martini as well. But I've teed it up enough here. What are your big takeaways from yesterday?
So I can't say I was entirely surprised. I think when we went through all 34, guilty on all 34 of them, I was somewhat surprised. But on Monday, I'd said, look, it's a Manhattan jury. He's Donald Trump. Trump has a notorious reputation for being less than fully truthful. And so when you have that reputation, it doesn't seem that hard to convince 12 people that, yes, he falsified business records. The more I chewed it over, though, the more I came around to this idea that, like, look, in the end, this is the Manhattan jury deciding that paying a porn star to stay quiet about the affair is a campaign expense. And that that just doesn't seem logical and to make sense. That ordinarily falsifying business records is a misdemeanor. To elevate it to a felony, you have to find this other crime that was involved with. And the idea was to hide this as a campaign expense, which I just don't think makes that much sense. I think makes it a good chance for overturn on appeal, but we'll see what happens here. But what's even more clear is the degree to which, if Donald Trump was not named Donald Trump, this case would not have been brought. Nobody cared. The statute of limitations is usually 2 years. For a felony, it can be 5 years. And where Bragg managed to, convince the judge is that, well, the time Trump spends outside of the state, including the, almost all of the 4 years that he was president, doesn't count. And that's why it was within the statute of limitations. You add all this up, and it seemed like a stretching of the law beyond anything. And also, let's point out that the prosecutor's office spent, several $1 million over the course of the prosecution of this. And you ask a Democrat, what are the worst things Donald Trump has ever done? Ask them for like 50 or 100 of the worst things. They're falsifying business records to cover up the transfer of funds to Michael Cohen isn't going to make the list. This was all forgotten. If Donald Trump was not running for president, we all know these charges would not have been brought. He would be off to, enjoy a quiet retirement or something like that. So this argument, look, clearly this was meant to get Trump. Now, 34 for 34, this jury was convinced. It's possible that this jury really looked at all the evidence, really carefully weighed all of it, concluded that Cohen is a reliable witness and trustworthy, never mind the fact that he's already pled guilty to lying to a financial institution. And they looked at it all and said, yes, we believe beyond a reasonable doubt that Trump committed these crimes. It is also possible, and I use Trump himself made the comparison of Al Capone. I would kind of prefer if the Republican presidential candidate did not compare himself to Al Capone. But he's made the argument about, Capone they nailed on tax evasion, not for any of his other terrible violent crimes when he was the mob boss in Chicago. I also thought about O.J. Simpson going to jail for 33 years, at least being sentenced to jail for 33 years for the attempted robbery and attempted kidnapping in that hotel in Las Vegas. And one of his lawyers afterwards had used the term the fifth quarter, the idea that you lose the game, but then you beat the other guys up in the parking lot after the game, so you win the game in the fifth quarter. The idea of whether this jury goes into this, and no, they think Donald Trump had committed crimes on January 6th. They believe he committed crimes in his 2 impeachment trials. The idea that they think that Donald Trump is a really rotten SOB. And he's wiggled off the hook every single time. He's figured out a way to escape every single time. He's Houdini. Well, this time we're not letting him get away with it. The details of this particular, charge be damned. And that's not the way the justice system is supposed to work. You can judge Donald Trump for the affair with Stormy Daniels, and it's sleazy as all hell. If you decide not to vote for him, hey, I totally get that. I totally understand that. But you're not supposed to just find a crime because you think the guy's an SOB. And I think, we certainly can't rule that out as happening. We may never know what was going through the minds of that jury, but I do note that in other high-profile cases, OJ, the Menendez brothers, folks like that, jurors do decide to write books about this. So maybe someday we will see an interview with a juror who will say how they saw all the evidence in this case. And maybe they'll come out and say, yeah, we thought Cohen was the most, Mother Teresa and the most reliable witness ever. I have a hard time believing that, but, we'll see. So we will see how this shakes out. But I think if you were going to, convict a former president of a crime, you'd really like it to be this airtight, be way beyond a reasonable doubt, clear application of the law case. And I know that there are Democrats who are still kind of fuming that this case went to trial first and not ones with Jack Smith, because I think everybody would agree. January 6th, taking classified documents to Mar-a-Lago, those are bigger and much more consequential alleged crimes than anything in this case. We'll see how this shakes out, but I do kind of feel like that there was this sense that this was Alvin Bragg campaigned on this. He said he was the guy best prepared to take on Trump. He got the conviction he wanted. And I figure any day now we'll be hearing about the Bragg for mayor or Bragg for governor campaign.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. The thing that stands out to me, Jim, is this, because as you well know, if you're on social media, there's going to be a ton of noise on a high-profile situation like this. And the people that back Trump are coming at it from a certain way. And then the people who hate Trump are coming at it from a certain way. So you kind of look for the people who have an opinion different than they're normally inclined to have. And there are so many people who either formally or informally would probably refer to themselves as Never Trump, who are livid over this. Andy McCarthy being one of them. He's not a Trump fan. I can promise you that. You know that as well. Noah Rothman, another one at National Review, is not a big fan. Absolutely furious about it. Noah's not saying he's ready to vote for Trump yet, but he's saying he's as close as he's ever been. So who knows whether this is a boiling reaction to this or whether people will see this after time to digest it a little bit as being a tipping point. We're going to talk about that in just a second, but it's the people who are very disturbed by this who you wouldn't necessarily assume that, especially given Andy thinking that, for example, the classified documents charges are extremely serious and extremely legitimate. He thought this was a Travis mockery. He didn't use that word, but pretty much in every step of the way.
We'll talk a bit in a second about the political fallout. I don't know how this is going to shake out. I could see, apparently Trump raised something like nearly $35 million last night. The Trump supporters are perhaps as fired up as they've ever been. There's, the anger is off the charts. It's like this volcanic eruption. Thankfully, no violence. Let's point out that anybody who feared that a Trump conviction was going to lead to January 6th style stuff, knocking on wood, so far we haven't seen anything like that. Trump fans are determined to make this, we're going to make our thoughts clear on this at the ballot box. I don't know if this is necessarily going to be a net advantage. There was polling that indicated there was a small sliver of voters who said, yes, if Trump was convicted, they wouldn't vote for him. My impression is that those folks were generally Republicans. They were generally, I don't know if they were necessarily Never Trump, or they fit the profile of a Nikki Haley voter, meaning that they were, capable of being shaken away from support for Trump, but they otherwise were very critical of Joe Biden, and they wanted to see Republicans win control of Congress. That's according to polling back in February. So, it is the end of May. I think by November, a lot of these folks will come home. I don't know for 100% certain. And I do kind of wonder, are there soccer moms out there? Are there suburbanites who look at this and say, oh my God, it's a convicted felon. Oh, I couldn't vote for that. And does that make them jump off the bandwagon? I just don't. Does that outweigh inflation? Does that outweigh the border? I don't know. And I don't think anybody else really feels like they have an absolute certainty how it's going to play with the broader electorate.
More in just a second. All right, Jim, let's dig into this even a little bit more, because not only were people, especially on the right, upset with the verdict last night, there are many, many people who are now saying that this was basically a massive kick in the shin to one of the pillars of our republic, that if you're going to use the courts as a political weapon, then that's going to spiral in ways that could be very, very damaging to this country down the road and quite soon. We talked about it just a moment ago with Alvin Bragg. He campaigned on getting Trump. Tish James campaigned on getting Trump, and they did. They got Trump. Both of those will now go to appeal and so forth. But last night, while the reaction on the left was more muted than I expected, they're already talking about sentencing. And the fact that Mershon is doing this on July 11th, just a couple of days before the Republican convention, is going to add even more oxygen to the idea that this is all a political setup. But then you have folks like George Conway, who helped to change the statute of limitations so the Trump sexual harassment trial could be waged and he could be held legally responsible. It was a civil trial, not criminal, but the E. Jean Carroll situation. So he was out last night saying, I thoroughly agree that Trump needs to be incarcerated, guilty of 34 felonies, no acceptance of responsibility, total contempt for the law and legal process, literally held in contempt 10 times, attacks on witnesses and jurors. There's no substantial justification for not sending him to prison. Norm Eisen, big-time lefty Obama guy, and he says that there's a very, very strong case for sending Trump to prison. And yes, these are 34 felonies. There's also the folks saying that Class E felonies don't always result in prison time, so it's going to be at the discretion of the judge, and this judge has not exactly been lenient towards Donald Trump. And so the question now becomes, Jim, is have we crossed this line? Have we had a tipping point when it comes to the rule of law in this country, and are the Democrats just brazenly waging it? Another piece of evidence is that one of the top guys of the Biden Justice Department joined the staff of Alvin Bragg and was very active in this case. So this is going to, like you said, be an extremely energized Republican base, Trump base coming into this summer. The question is is this really a tipping point? How do you see it?
Yeah, well, first of all, let's point out that whether you decide to vote with great fervor and excitement and passion and energy, or whether you decide to vote lethargically and only marginally motivated, it's still one vote. It's still, like you don't necessarily. Now, maybe there's some people on the margins who are more motivated to vote on this, but I don't expect this to be a major factor by that measuring stick. But this morning I saw a tweet from Bonchi Red State. I guess he used to be commenting over at the Red State site. He makes the observation that Trump won't be sentenced to jail because the normal outcome in cases like this. And he inserted a GIF that said, "I'm going to stop you right there." And yes, a first-time offender usually would not get jail time. And in fact, but keep in mind, most of the time, falsifying your business records is a misdemeanor. And, fines, probation, there's all kinds of options short of jail time. But because, as I point out, we've done so many things in which it was so different from the normal prosecution of an alleged crime like this, all the old rules seem to be thrown out the window. All the old precedents seem to be thrown out the window. Donald Trump is a defendant completely unlike any other defendant. The short is, I have no idea what to expect from the sentencing process of this. This is bad. This is bad because I think it really shakes people's faith in the system of justice. I think it really shakes people. I mean, like I said, the degree to which Bragg and everyone else was campaigning on "I'm going to get Trump" was a sign. That's not, your job is, your job is not to say, your job is to follow the evidence, the facts, and the law. It is not to say, hey, voters, we know you really hate this guy. So vote for me. I'm the guy who's going to figure out a way to put him behind bars. It's just not supposed to work that way. It's Manhattan. So obviously this is a, heavily Democratic, pretty darn far to the left, vehemently anti-Trump electorate, but you're not supposed to do it this way. A couple of days ago, in the Monday Morning Jolt, I came across an old article in Time magazine about the John Edwards case. And remember, John Edwards was not put on trial for having an affair with his mistress and abandoning his wife and impregnating. That was all sleazy stuff, but allegedly the payoffs to her were for using campaign funds. Does this sound familiar? And so I went back and I read this. There's a section, again, Time magazine, and it says, while the government presented a convincing case for Edwards' general turpitude, what it failed to do was show that he had committed a crime. This prosecution was a stretch from the beginning. Edwards was accused of violating campaign finance laws, but those laws are notoriously arcane. None directly addresses a candidate's or staff soliciting contributions to cover up a candidate's affair. It is not surprising that navigating this murky legal landscape, at least some jurors would accept the defense's contention that the funds were gifts rather than campaign contributions, and that the campaign finance laws therefore did not apply. Remember, it was a hung jury, and they never went back a second time against John Edwards. Does that sound familiar? Does it sound kind of comparable to what we're seeing here? And in that case, the jurors like, this doesn't. But against Trump, oh no, it's all clear as day. Absolutely, 34 counts, guilty on every last one of them. Again, we will, someday we will likely will hear from these jurors. I suspect because of it being the first criminal conviction of a former president, I think someday one of those 12 is going to want a book deal. One of those 12 is going to want to sit down with. Usually this would be a Barbara Walters style interview. I'm trying to think who would be the right person to. Maybe Rachel Maddow. Maybe Chris Hayes. So they'll sit down with somebody, and they'll talk about what the deliberations were like, and we will figure out either yes, we totally thought Michael Cohen was the most reliable witness in the world, or they'll say, look, we felt the evidence was overwhelming, and we weren't convinced by any of Trump's defenses. We believe this was designed to affect the campaign, and there was no personal motivation to not let Melania know. There's no way that was a factor in Trump's thinking. Or, maybe they'll come out and say it, that hey, we all knew Trump was a crook when we walked in there. And that's not the way it's supposed to work. So we will see how this shakes out. But I can see why so many folks on the right look at this, see this as a kangaroo court, see this as a guy getting railroaded, seeing this as a guy, the old Soviet expression, show me the man, I'll show you the crime. The idea that he was, they were determined to get him by any way possible, and that's why they did this way of stretching the law and twisting it inside out and all that kind of stuff. So we'll see how things shake out from here. This may well backfire. I saw some interesting people saying this moment feels comparable to the Kavanaugh hearings. And, 2018 was supposed to be a good year for Democrats, and they won the House. They did not win the Senate, and they lost a couple of Senate seats they could have won. The Senate hearings on Kavanaugh had conservatives probably comparably angered. The level of anger is probably comparable then as it is now. So maybe this ends up hurting the Democrats. We will see how this shakes out, but it definitely feels like we have gone into some uncharted waters here.
No, I think that's definitely the case. And there's going to be some people saying, well, Trump's always crossing the line or muddying the line ethically. How can you go to the ramparts for this guy? You don't have to like him to see what's going on here and how this was brought about, how the trial was executed, and the Rube Goldberg way of putting the charges together. It's kind of like free speech. You gotta defend it for the person you like the least and what they're saying the least, or else the system begins to erode. And it's not just concern about what's happening to Donald Trump. He's certainly the most prominent person in that situation. But there's been a lot of frustration about the Biden Justice Department prosecuting and trying to sentence pro-life demonstrators outside of abortion clinics to 10 or 11 years. And meanwhile, they can't seem to find their keys to go investigate the torchings of pregnancy centers and that sort of thing. So it's not just that. It's just the most prominent example of that.
A good question to ask today. Why is the statute of justice blind? It's not a statement that everybody involved in the criminal justice system can't see. It's not the idea that the point is not that they're bad at this. The point is it's not a weakness. The point is that they don't see who you are and your background when you are put before the court, that everyone is treated equally. The idea is that we don't have aristocracy. We don't judge one person harsher or more lenient than the other. Some would argue that we do. Certainly helps. Some might say partisan status, some might say wealth, some might say fame, some parts of other factors. But the point is that the ideal is that you walk in there and everybody gets treated the same, and that you're judged on the evidence and the law. Now, I remember a couple of years ago when Obama was nominating Sonia Sotomayor to the Supreme Court, the wise Latina. And he emphasized how I want a Supreme Court justice who has empathy, who understands and sides with the people. And the whole point, inadvertently or deliberately, Obama was basically saying, I don't believe the statute of justice should be blind. I think the court should evaluate who you are based on race and class and gender and probably sexual orientation and gender identity and all that other stuff. He was arguing against the impartial application of justice. And I was kind of like, am I hearing this? Is everybody am I taking crazy pills? Obama, this is the idea. Like the justice system is not supposed to have empathy towards one side or the other. It's supposed to be even-handed. What does the evidence say? That's what, And look, there are a lot of reasons for people to doubt that. We did a whole episode on OJ when he passed away. Like, people have had doubts about the criminal justice system for a very long time. Maybe they should. This was my other podcast partner, Mickey White, made the observation. How many people are looking a little more differently at criminal justice reform today than they did a couple days ago? How many people now identify with the defendant in a way that they didn't now that they've seen the way the system, the way the prosecutors went after Trump in this case? It's an interesting argument. We took a couple episodes ago, I talked about how the Soros crowd ruined criminal justice reform that actually started from fairly conservative governors like Rick Perry, Bobby Jindal, and Chris Christie. So we'll see. But I think there will be lasting political repercussions from this. And not a lot of silver linings, but we may have found one.
All right, Jim, finishing on what is a qualified good martini, probably, but a good one nonetheless, because we had heard, and you pointed this out earlier in the week, that Politico, breathless reporting that, whenever this verdict comes down, Joe Biden's going to make a public statement from the White House, because we want it from an official presidential setting, not a campaign setting, because we got to keep those separate. And so ultimately, the White House decided not to do that. There was no public statement on camera. There was a statement released from the campaign about no one's above the law, and here's all these other reasons why Trump is horrible, and you got to vote for Joe Biden and so forth. And so the discretion was the better part of that was the right move. Biden coming out and given his way of tripping over just the most basic of things probably would have really made that bad. And I think the thing that probably tipped the decision not to do it was how much the Bob De Niro thing blew up in their face earlier in the week when he came to make a pitch for the Biden campaign in front of the courthouse, because that didn't leave anybody with the impression that this was a political prosecution. So what did you make of Biden actually deciding to stay out of the spotlight yesterday?
Well, first of all, Greg, I note that you could not put the word valor and Biden in the same sentence, and I salute your discretion there. Discretion is the better part of whatever Biden's doing over there. Secondly, Let's put it, not only was Robert De Niro brought out as the Biden campaign surrogate, but then his message was, even if this guy's acquitted or it's a hung jury, we all know he's guilty, which is not really how the justice system is supposed to work, and not really the message anybody associated with the Biden campaign. Look, even if he's innocent, he's really guilty. It's not that's bad. That's not how this is, but look, as of Monday, it sounded like Biden was going to take to the airwaves immediately. And conceivably, like from the White House, they didn't say an Oval Office address, but probably the Roosevelt Room or something. And I was like, one, who the hell cares what Joe Biden thinks of this? But two, there's no reason for the president to go out and give any statement on this. Maybe the most terse, justice has been done. We should all respect the verdict. Trump had his day in court, and the jury has come back with their decision. There's really, and knowing Biden's runaway mouth, the odds that you'd get a De Niro-esque, we all knew he was guilty from the beginning, I'm glad they got him. That there's just too much opportunity for this to go terribly wrong. People already see this, let's say many Trump voters see this, and many Trump supporters see it as a politically motivated prosecution. Biden going out and spiking the football would only enhance that, would only increase that. So Biden was in Delaware. Apparently, they're marking the anniversary of the death of Beau Biden. The timing was very fortuitous because and as of this recording, probably around 11:30ish or so on Friday morning Eastern time, Biden has not issued a statement other than that brief statement from the campaign, and I think that's the way it should be. I don't think the president should get in on this because he oversees the attorney general. The attorney general oversees or appointed the special counsel. The special counsel is prosecuting Trump on two other ones. The Georgia case still going ahead, even though the prosecutor was banging her chief investigator. Now, I guess that's hunky-dory. Okay, fine. When the argument is, the other thing, I remember when they said Biden would give a statement, but they said Biden's statement would not be political. Come on. Greg is laughing because, listeners, you can't see my smirk right now, but it's not political when the president offers a statement about the conviction of the guy who's running against. I think this is absurd. Having said that, if I were, considering how many times we've seen Biden flip-flop, if I were the Trump campaign, I'd go with a message: our man has convictions, their man doesn't.
Yeah, a couple extra thoughts on this. Number one, it was an evening verdict, so we know how Biden performs in the evening.
Yes, from the her statements, I was just talking to Justice Whizzer White,
So that's definitely
RBG told me yesterday. So
not political, but there was stories a few months ago, probably now, that he was getting on Merrick Garland for not prosecuting these cases faster. So totally apolitical on that. And just in case you thought the fun in the courtroom was ending, Hunter Biden goes on trial on Monday.
Yeah, but so here's the thing. If you're the Biden campaign, convicted felons are the worst is really not the message you want to go with for, because in about 2 or 3 months, at the end of the court, the tax case, the end of the gun case. None of this, by the way, is the influence peddling case. That's the most serious, issue of all. But,
sure.
Again, Biden's the guy running on gun control whose son lied on his gun application. Biden's the guy running on tax increases and, hunting down tax cheats when his son forgot to pay $1 million. By the way, decided to attempted to deduct what he spent on prostitutes as a business expense. Now, you almost admire the creativity. You almost admire the nerve, the brazenness to do that. But yeah, so at some point, this will come up in the debate, I suspect. My understanding, by the way, is that Trump has talked in the past about owning a gun. Obviously, with Secret Service protection, he doesn't, walk around with it. And God knows the last time. But I believe if he has it, I think if upon sentencing, he becomes a convicted felon and has to turn it over. I've heard people saying that Trump won't be able to vote for himself in November. I think that depends on whether or not he is incarcerated. I believe if you have probation or something like that, your voting rights are not taken away. But it remains to be seen. So we'll see how that shakes out. But yeah, this will come up in the debate. And, Trump will point out that, I was just in Rikers the other day. They're getting something ready for your son. So, yeah, the June 27th debate now will happen before sentencing. That ended up being interesting timing, to say the least. So, man, what a way to end the week. So, Jim, we'll see where the landscape puts us on Monday. Talk to you then. Glad we got to talk at least once this week, Greg. See you Monday.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corumbus of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Do subscribe to the podcast if you don't already, and tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great weekend and join us again on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.